Good morning, everybody. Happy 2025, although it's now the middle of January, so I still can't believe that it's the middle of January. We're going to thank you for joining us again. We're going to kick off this year with what I thought was going to be a bit of an easy session, but I think some of the team have been a bit boffins and done far too much prep for today. But we're going to talk about technology trends, right? So, as we enter into 2025. Every industry analyst starts publishing their reports. I've read a fair few actually this week, and we've just had the Consumer Electronics Show as well, which we were just chatting off stage about some of the exciting and I won't say crazy, but a lot of these things that have always been quite crazy are just really becoming real now. So it's quite interesting to see how the pace of what was science fiction is really becoming real. So we're gonna kick off today and talk about some of those things, see what things that we think are going to be particularly exciting across both our consumer world and professional lives as well. And sometimes those things are the same. And we'll have a look back at the end of the year and kind of see what's actually kicked off and see what's happened and what hasn't. But I think it's good timing, really. So we know that AI is obviously going to feature very heavily in the discussions today, and of course that takes many forms. But of course, yesterday was quite a big day as well for sort of UK government and AI news, really, with this AI opportunities. I think it was called the AI Opportunities Action Plan or something along those lines, that was published yesterday, which is quite interesting. And I've only kind of had a flick through that this morning, but in short, that was really about the UK yet again stepping up to say that we really need to harness now this opportunity of AI across computing and data infrastructure, and of course access to the technology, and more importantly getting our talent ready and hiring developing the best talent, which is obviously makes sense. I think in just the world that I work in with customers looking at AI adoption, it's still quite scattergun. I think there's organizations, some of you on this call, that are really embracing AI, both from what you can buy consumer and what you can develop and build yourselves. But I think this year definitely is going to be a year where we see this really accelerate. And it was interesting just reading the bit that I did around this real focus on encouraging AI adoption across obviously both private and public sectors. But a lot of the action plan yesterday talked specifically about public sector as well, and improving public sectors, how it's going to boost productivity, how it's going to help with overcome job shortages, and really just develop and to deliver those services to residents and stuff. So I thought, Darren, as we kind of kick into the predictions, and this may not have been on your list, but I thought I was going to start with you just because I thought that probably impacts your world massively. So I thought it'd just be worth getting your view on that. And if you haven't got anything to comment and you've got some other predictions, then obviously feel free and take the stage.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rob. No, happy to take that. I mean, yeah, it is really good that central government are now recognising and evangelising that what a lot of us have been saying already, that AI and technology has got huge potential in the public sector, but it's not necessarily always about the technology. And I think this was an interesting sort of point that wasn't directly made, but a point that everybody was sort of thinking of afterwards, was that some of what was discussed obviously has impact on regulation and risk, and those are really the areas that need to sort of catch up with the technology. But the fact that the government are now saying that this is a major priority is going to be the unblockers for those types of things which were getting in the way and maybe stifling a bit of innovation and blocking the take up of the technology side, because there is that recognition that this is a priority. We need to be moving on with these things, and therefore anything which is an impediment we need to find a way around. And the classic example of that actually is around the sort of the pothole side of things. There's a lot of regulation in terms of councils carrying risks in terms of, inspections of potholes, what happens if drivers damage their vehicles and the pothole hasn't been inspected properly, all of those types of things. And actually, the regulation doesn't currently make any allowance in there for if those inspections have been done via a technology method rather than the traditional manual method. And those are the types of things that actually we need to unblock to realise those benefits.
Yeah,
So
potholes.
yeah.
AI is
Yeah,
going to fix our potholes.
those were my immediate thoughts, is that, yeah, good direction of travel, good recognising the opportunity, and actually good that now we've got the year of government, hopefully some of these regulation and risk type blockers can start to be addressed to improve adoption.
Yeah, also, I mean, I think if we sit, I mean, like I say, AI is likely to dominates every conversation at the moment. But I think, hopefully there'll be some things outside of this as well. But I think the other thing, of course, that's been, I think, really big, and we did touch on this on, I think it was back in November when we spoke about these, autonomous or agenic AI systems and things, which I think as well is going to be, really big. I read some stats earlier in the week, I think it must be last week actually, just about what that growth looks like from a monetary perspective. I think, growing from 166 billion last year to exceeding 423 billion this year, which is some really crazy numbers that Gartner shared. But I think what's really interesting as well was, I don't know if any of you saw it, but there was a speech by Satya Nadella at Microsoft in November, just after Ignite, talking about, it was really interesting to hear him actually talking about a lot of the systems that they sell and make a lot of money out of, right? So things like Dynamics, and they were talking about SAP and Salesforce even, which is probably why Salesforce are on their back so much. But they were talking about, almost like predicting the death of traditional SaaS type application things, because of the way that these agents are going to just interact with these huge data sources themselves, and everyone's just going to interact. And it was quite interesting. If you haven't seen it, he kind of goes on forever about this stuff. But it's quite interesting, just kind of thinking actually about the way in which we're starting to use technology is shifting, and our reliance now on AI and the impacts of what that's going to look like as we shift to this kind of world of not just asking it to summarize meetings, but actually taking action for us and doing things, becoming that customer service engine. I mean, it was really funny. I saw a post yesterday as well, actually, which I just share, which was actually I won't name the company because it might not be fair, but they their AI agent popped up, and they asked it. They started having a conversation with it, and they asked if it was human. And it said, I am human. It said, how are you human? It said, like, we do use lots of AI agents to help us, but you are speaking to a person. This is my name. I'm from this location. And then he asked the agent to create some code for him, and literally within a second, this human wrote all these thousands of lines of code, right? And of course, that then kind of shared across the internet. So it's a really interesting one, I think.
Yeah. I was just going to mention, Rob, that's the future of the user interface actually can be fundamentally changed by AI, and how we and our businesses interact with our data in our back end systems. If you look at what we're doing in terms of changing our front end in order to make customer interaction a lot easier, I imagine how that could also be applied to the back end as well. And I think, looking, maybe this is not a 2025 thing, but looking a lot further down the line, I think what Satya Nadella has been saying recently around this side, he is really pertinent. Why does a user within our organizations query a database via a traditional sort of UI, when actually they're just looking for an answer to a question? And if the AI is good enough to return that answer to them, actually looking through those tables of data to actually get that information information starts to become suboptimal, and actually it's changing the way we do I mean, the first area where we're seeing this, I think, is really within search engines, and changing the search engines from actually returning lists of articles to actually returning the answer, but with the articles listed as citations.
Sort of reverse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go, hi.
Hi, I think Ken was ahead.
Oh, Ken, you are ahead.
You've got numbers in the corner. You should know this. Rob.
I know. I just literally saw yours pop up. So, Ken, please.
I think actually, I just wanted to kind of jump in with some of the stuff that Darren just said there at the start. I think 2025 is a year of compliance. It's a horrible word. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's incredibly dull. But I think you went straight off down to AI doing this and AI doing that and AI doing this, and you've got some changes politically where they're going to be promoting that kind of approach to free reign. Let's do this, let's do that. And actually, interestingly enough, with the AI opportunities piece that came out of the UK government, there was a real element of talking about creating this and creating that. But fundamentally, the European Union, the UK, we operate in a protectionist society. And actually, when people start to realize what happens is the first pain is you don't hire people. How do you stop that from happening? And wait a minute, data's going everywhere. How do you trust it? How do you control it? And what I think we'll see through 25 is I genuinely think that actually, I disagree with Darren. I think there'll be more impediments to actually using this stuff because people will dig in their heels and go, holy, this is, can I trust this? This is misinformation. This is doing that over there and I've got no control over it. Brilliant that it's going to find us potholes. But, there's a real element where actually there are some real concerns that, especially as you have some really loud voices in the Musks and the kind of the US camp coming out and really threatening the rest of the world with this stuff, that actually it's human nature to become a bit more protectionist. And I can see us all of a sudden, there are already things that are scheduled in the EU mandates to actually look at AI through 2025, watch those accelerate as people's roles are threatened by technology and people start to fear for this. And I actually think we're in an inflection point. We want all of this amazing tech. It's brilliant what it does, but actually it's going to be revolutionary for a lot of industries. And I believe in the old adage, and I can't remember which economist it was. It's a little bit like when trains replaced the horse and cart. The horse and cart owners were like, this is putting me out of business. And then all the people are going, but now think about it. When you put a train in, you build all of this connectivity. There's more work. There's actually train stations. You need engineers. Actually, it creates a massive amount more. But there's a skill gap, and it takes years to build across those gaps. And I think away from the tech, just for a little bit, I don't think any nation has addressed the skill gap properly because this evolution of tech has happened in literally 36 months. Universities are not geared up for this. There are education. I've got one of my team members, his kid is learning some code, and he's had to go into school and said, you're wasting your time on this code that you're teaching these kids. It's not relevant. I'll come in and do it for free, but let's update the curriculum. And they're like, but this is the national curriculum.
Yes.
And he's like, this stuff has changed so rapidly. It is so out of date. And and I think what we're going to see through 25 is there's going to be a massive demand to use this tech. And we can talk about how powerful and wonderful it already is, because it is super impressive. I actually think you're going to see organizations talking about ethics, morals of this stuff. Actually, what happens if you make mass redundancies just because you've been able to implement something? Socially responsible technology shouldn't do that, right? We should be looking to transition people into the new roles, but we haven't got the skills. And I don't care where you are in the world. That's a global issue, right? This is not just a UK thing. This is across the world. So I think that's
interesting view. Yeah.
And I think this is an interesting point that Darren picked up. It was like, well, in some ways, governments are being motivated to use AI will remove some of the impediments. And then I think actually what happens is they go, oh my word, here's a tidal wave of unemployment or whatever. Let's put some of those impediments back. And I think this is why we're in that kind of, nobody really wants to take the risk because they really don't know what the outcome is going to be. And we all know that that's, for governments globally, that becomes proper, like that's stick in the mud stuff. You stop. So that was the point I wanted to pick up before we went any further. I don't want to sound all bleak and depressing, but I just think that there is we've got all of this amazing stuff in the wings, but I do think there is actually walls starting to be built, and I see it already. I'm part of the AI Institute for Responsible AI. We get feedback on that, and it's fascinating how actually when it was law firms we were studying or looking at, just all of a sudden their ability to not have associates, and it's like, and this idea that it augments their skills has been proven to be a complete falsehood. If you can use it to replace an associate, you replace the associate. You don't go, here's an improved associate. And we've got a lot of work to actually get through to actually make this stuff ethically appropriate as well as being truly amazing on the tech front. So sorry, that was just a slight piece on a contrary bit, but I do think 25 is going to be a big one for that.
I agree. Go.
Yeah, really interesting, and I'm surprised, Ken, that you brought up the compliance bit and not me, considering I'm an info. But I think
he done his homework. I told you.
Oh no, it's fine. I mean, it's good. You know, it means I don't have to talk about it from the infosec, and I look like a progressive infosec person rather than a kind of reactive old school. But no, I think it's fascinating, the whole conversation around AI, and I think there's, Rob, you touched upon it, which is agentive AI. So I'm actually heading up the strategy for AI in our organization, putting together the guardrails and kind of doing it. I think, Ken, the point around ethics is really important, which is, we just don't nearly enough ask the question in tech, just because we can do it, should we do it? It's just always, we're going to do it because it's a thing to do and everyone else is doing it, rather than saying, actually, is this the right thing to do? And and that's something that I'm also really keen to push on in our organization. But I think the usefulness of AI is really interesting, because what we've been dealing with recently is assistive AI, right?
Yes.
So this is stuff that helps us. This is stuff that we put an input in, we get an input back, and it helps us do a thing, right? That's what it's been doing. It's always based on interaction. Where it's changing, and I think Claude have done something with the computer, automatically does stuff for you on a computer, is the agentive AI, which will automatically go out and do a thing based on what you've asked it to do, and then it will continue that. And that's where it becomes useful, to the point that the concern that has been, which is it's going to replace jobs, right? That's been the biggest concern for a lot of people, which is it's going to replace jobs. So for a law firm, it's fantastic. If you can replace 10 people, that's a massive saving in terms of wages that you can get some, an automated thing to do. However, I think it's that usefulness of agentive AI, which is 2025, which as we go into 2025, we're going to see an emergence of, and useful. So Darren, you mentioned about potholes. For us in L&Q, it's about damp and mold, and that's the big item that we're trying to address, because it's the one thing that all housing associations really struggle with, and identifying that amongst the plethora of data that we see on a day-to-day basis from our residents and what we've logged historically and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, I feel I'm going to go down the slightly bleak route with Ken and say, actually, I still don't think AI is that great. I think lots of people want to do stuff with it, but I don't think we've even scratched the surface of actually its usefulness. We're using it to create this, and it's speeding a few things up, but it's not really AI if it's not doing all the things automatically. CES, they've talked about robots and all that for, talking about CES. There's robots and all that, but none of them are that kind of, I'm going to take over the world robot that everyone's fearful of. They are still limited in what they can do. They've evolved the RoboVac to, so you've got an arm that can pick something up out of the way, which I don't know if you saw, but again, that's not revolutionary.
It doesn't work with children though.
Well,
it's not strong enough.
Well, that's the thing. If we do that, then we are in that kind of dangerous times of where things will take over. So I think, and it's interesting, we started on AI, but I think the other thing that I was reading is they expect quantum computing to actually come to life this year.
Yeah,
that's the big one, I think, and that's what changes everything, because that's what underpins all of this technology, right? Technology is great, and I think we've got to a point where the software is good enough. It's the hardware that's limiting it again. So we have this kind of cycle that we've seen over years, which is either the hardware is good enough or the software is good enough. But we've never had a point where the hardware can support everything the software wants to do, and vice versa. quantum all of a sudden changes that. All of a sudden we don't have that bottleneck of processing. What you're going to have is the processing will be there. It's just where can we take AI? So all of a sudden these things that are taking a lot longer are going to speed up. So that's a really interesting one to keep an eye out for 2025. And I'll
yeah, I think you're right on that. I mean, I think it's been, you look at the, you know, all the huge amounts of traditional data centers that are being built, like, to deal with AI as we have today. But as you say, it's more dealing with chat, right, and stuff. But you think, you know, absolutely, and I think that shift has to happen. I think this is the fuel to make it. I mean, you look at the investments that, you know, the universities are making across the technology, just what IBM, Microsoft, you know, Google, everybody is investing now. I know it's been a thing for a while, but that spend has just gone crazy, because I think you're absolutely right. It's what's needed to drive it. I also think we're going to see on that, and we're starting to see it as well, but I think we're also going to start to see a lot more of that disconnected edge processing of AI as well. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that, you know, offline. I know we're kind of connected all the time, but sometimes we're not, of how that's going to manifest itself into kind of what's delivered through cloud and what's delivered locally, because today pretty much AI is a cloud service. And I think we'll see a big shift in that this year as well.
It's I know you've got your paw up, Darren,
Yeah.
but it's just, you just said something there, Rob, that actually was one other area where I was going to go, which is the edge stuff. So, Darren, I don't know if you want to just jump in with what you were going to say, and then I've kind of pick up the edge piece.
Yeah, I was just going to come back on the quantum side, because there's been massive advances on that over the last year. And that has really big implications in terms of privacy, you know, all of the encryption methods that we use at the moment to protect communications, to protect data in both in transit and at rest, are potentially at risk from quantum computing being able to crack those codes. And there's sort of that arms race going on between sort of the quantum computer developers, but also the post-quantum cryptographers that are trying to achieve an encryption standard that is actually resilient to a quantum computing type attack. And I guess, you know, some of the cyber security activity that's been going on over the last year with various different cyber attacks hoovering up, you know, vast quantities of data, some of which has been encrypted. But, you know, there's behavior where, well, you know, we don't care if data's encrypted at the moment because quantum computing is just around the corner, and then we'll have the ability to be able to crack all of that already hoovered up data. So I think, yeah, there's some quite big sort of, I don't want to be sort of a sort of a doom merchant, but quite societal issues as well with quantum, because I think the reaches of stripping away that privacy without any immediate replacement could be quite worrying.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in a little bit here, and I think I get the view, Darren, for sure. I think the reality is also, remember that, you know, it's a to and fro thing. So yes, we're going to have cyber criminals that are going to break quantum. They're going to break encryption for quantum. But you're going to have companies that are also going to encrypt with quantum. So you've got this kind of cat and mouse game that we've always had from the start.
Yeah.
I think the point around quantum is, we've been talking about it for a while. I think it's the emergence of, you know, let's be honest, this is kind of bleeding edge, you know, where it's going to be exclusive to a few things, and it's going to drive the change, as opposed to right, all of a sudden, you know, it's not like AI where someone, you know, OpenAI release a platform that everyone can access online, and all of a sudden it's available. This is going to be exclusive to very, very limited companies
and nation states.
With huge resources.
Initially, before it becomes this kind of.
But you say that, Goa, but it's interesting. Even though we can accept that it's so niche. And you and I must suffer the same sort of things. I've had to fill in an InfoSec security survey where I actually had to have a policy to explain what our approach to quantum computing would be.
Really?
And I'm like, oh, come on. Like, this is, I'm not a futurist. I am currently like, I'm not, I'm just, and it was almost, and that was, but it just goes to show how in the space of that, like we talk about the AI and the accelerated thinking, like literally 12 months, 18 months ago, yes, every new quantum computing existed, but you weren't being asked by clients what your approach and policy was for it. The fact that you're getting that in a questionnaire is showing that there is thinking out there referencing quantum computing. And I absolutely agree with Goa on this about, unlike AI, the quantum computing will be the remit of very large organizations and nation states. And so again, it will be very differently handled, as opposed to, here you go, here's generative AI, go and make your own, like, you don't need Photoshop anymore, go make a movie, like this sort of stuff that comes along. And I think they're very complementary, but there's a contrast in how they'll appear. I also agree with Darren and Go about this, that you will see more of it through 25. I think that's a big piece. And the bit that I wanted to pick up on, which is the edge stuff, and I think this is the bit that it's the untethering of AI that I think will be big in 25, when you don't have to sit there being connected to a data set or a data source, like at need is where the AI is operating, and whether we start to see more of that. And I think this is going to be pushed by the likes of the Googles, where and the Apples of this world, pushing true AI out to handheld devices. And if you think you can get it on a phone, and yes, there's still internet connectivity, but it's actually doing the processing and the work at the device, at the edge, and then match that to an engineer going out, checking out roads, somebody with a damp meter that's actually connected, that's pulling the AI, that can actually tell you what type of mold, what type of damp it is, feeding it all in a way that actually, I think that is augmenting people's livelihoods in a way that is really powerful and does make things more efficient. All of this stuff still then comes back to the social implications, that instead of having a qualified specialist on damp, you jam a probe into a wall, the AI on the device goes, I know what that is, and sends it off. We have to really think about what the social implications are for almost dumbing down people. I mean, this is the part that I think that, again, this is an inflection year. It's we'll see some of this stuff. Some of it will be amazing. Some of it will be great. Corporate organizations will look at it and go, great, I need one engineer, not five. And I think that's going to be the caveat to all of this wonderful stuff, is that there's always going to be that social implication.
I think that dumbing down bit is quite an interesting point, actually, isn't it? Because I think, it's one of the big fear factors. And I guess it's a bit like, when the calculator came out, right? And it was always, I remember my teacher was, I'm sure we've mentioned this before, being told you won't always have a calculator in your pocket. Well, you do, and actually very soon you'll have a language model on your phone, right? And but I think it's also that point of standardization as well, because humans are great. We've all got a different perception. We all think about different things. Just on this call, we'll have a different perception, different take on something. But it's interesting when you start looking at having, like I say, having a language model, an AI on a local device, and doing, as you say, damp meters, right? And you think moving forward, you'll have sensors in all the accommodations that will know if it's happening. It knows what's going to happen next because it's an expert in that thing, but it's also an expert in heating and ventilation. It's also an expert in, and I think that's where it's going to be really interesting. And I've already seen obviously Apple are doing it, Google are doing it, Microsoft's doing it, but these AI runtimes are now going into things like the Windows subsystems, right? So the next iteration of Windows is going to have language models built in, and you'll be able to literally connect language models into the environment. It's very creative led at the moment. Paint can do AI stuff, right? Great, but that's all about trying to demonstrate the potential of what the technology is doing. And once we start to get the developers leveraging that code, that's going to be a really interesting future as well, of proper offline. Military uses are going to be huge, where cloud isn't a thing. I think I think that's we have a big year this year to see what changes. Go.
I was just going to say, Rob, again, I agree with all of that, but a lot of the stuff, I think we turn a lot of this into this really clever stuff when it's actually a lot of it's really straightforward. What I mean by that is, like, literally yesterday I was on our SharePoint, and now we've got agent on SharePoint which can do.
Oh yes, they've all rolled out, haven't they?
Yeah, that's been rolled out, and as I said, that's the simple stuff that doesn't require a lot of effort, that gives lots of value. So all of a sudden your SharePoint becomes useful because you can search for stuff a lot more clever, or you can summarize that stuff. And I think that's the bit that I think is transformative, because that's what's going to affect people's lives. I still go back to the fact that, you know, I run an AI working group, and we're asking people to do AI when people are literally cannot use Excel, Word, PowerPoint to its full potential. So, you know, yes, but AI can accelerate that. And we had a really good example of someone who, so we've got people asking for the, you know, the Office 365 Copilot.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? We've got Copilot, which is the standard enterprise version, which is a web portal. And one of the people that's on the group actually used that to build a Power BI dashboard in a matter of minutes rather than a matter of days. You know, that's the value, right? It's we can go down this kind of really hyper, we can do all this really clever stuff. Actually, it's bringing those efficiencies at a more wider level on the ground. That is kind of, I think we're going to see more of that, and we're going to see more people that are going to train and you know, follow the model. And I think the whole government initiative is to drive AI skills just the same way tech skills is to say, right, we need people to just understand it a bit more.
Well, it's like the days, didn't we? I remember looking at CVs years and years ago, where you'd have, you know, internet skills, you know, proficient with Word, you know, on your CV. No one ever write that today. You wouldn't put on your CV that you know how to use the internet, but it's almost at that point, isn't it? Yeah. Darren.
I was just going to say, while we're talking about end user compute, so looking again in the crystal ball, is 2025 actually the year when x86 architecture is finally fully supplanted by ARM?
Good. Yeah. Well, it's certainly quite a battle going on, isn't there? I mean, so I've just got a new device actually, which I need to set up properly, which is ARM based. In fact, I'm on an old ARM based device now. But it's really interesting, isn't it? But again, I think it's all about, it's a bit like, you know, what phone do you use, right? I think it's all about what tool for the right job. But it is interesting. So I think I think last year I'd almost call the year. I mean, you think how many times that, you know, ARM on the desktop side, right, or the laptop side has been around. I mean, the first Windows ARM device was 2012. I mean, all right, there was no apps for it, but look how far it's come. It kind of disappeared. Kind of everyone forgot about it until 20, whatever it was, 18, 19. But yeah, it's interesting now where that tech innovation's coming. And that's of course caused Intel, right, to go crazy. I mean, there's a lot of new stuff coming from Intel. But I wanted to shift gears slightly, because we were talking about some of this stuff before we went live. And you know, keeping on that kind of theme, I guess, of AI, but and consumer electronics show we touched on. But you know, what happens when you give a large language model a body, right? So we talked about robotics earlier on. We touched on that. I know we were chewing that over just before we went live, but I think that's a really interesting one, right? And I know we were talking about these, you know, the robot vacuums and the extensions to those things. But you know, Ken, I'm going to come back to you. You made a really good point. I don't want to steal your thunder, but you made a really interesting point about how robotics in Japan is evolving, and I think it'll be good just to share that, because I think it's really interesting.
So they have demographic issues, aging population. They don't have immigration in the same way as the rest of the world, and there's barriers to introducing fresh new people into Japan, whether it's cultural sort of language or whatever. So what they have adopted robotics and have done and accepted robotics for many years. Where it's really prevalent, and actually where it's really interesting, where it's kind of almost bleeding edge, is actually in the looking after the aging population in Japan. And they have robots that operate in the care homes, nursing homes, the old people homes, that provide so many different functions and are trusted. And this is a bit that I didn't get to earlier on, and are trusted to do it. So they are semi-autonomous machines that actually will come and rotate people in their beds. They will provide company. They will deliver medicines. They will walk people around the buildings. I mean, this is a little bit more than your Roomba, right? This is a machine that will understand, wait a minute, this person is incredibly frail. I am rotating in their bed. I've got to be mindful. It's using the AI. Well, the robots are very clever. They have been using AI. They're now using even more powerful AI. This is that point about the edge piece where you get to, and they don't necessarily look like the robots out of iRobot. They're not that kind of scale. They do still look like clunking machines, but fundamentally they are actually providing real human function, and actually they're exporting this tech to the rest of the world. So actually I believe we're going to see in the NHS this year an adoption of some of the Japanese technology around actually providing remote medicinal care. So in other words, you get these remote GPs and they're robots, and there is a GP at the other end, but it can actually take your temperature, check you. It's got cameras and sensors. It's an incredibly clever piece of kit, and it comes from Japan. And I think this is where the AI becomes, to Goa's point, really powerful and useful. This is where you're trusting it to do stuff. It's intelligent and it provides feedback. It's collating the data. It doesn't make mistakes. It doesn't write down 103 instead of 13, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, they do make mistakes, but it's less likely to make human error. It will make sensor errors. And I think this is the piece where we get into some really interesting conversations again around what's acceptable and what do you trust, and precision. And I think this is a fascinating point of where we're actually getting to, where the hardware, and I think it was Goa again who mentioned this about hardware catching up with the software and intention and going beyond the need. So NVIDIA and everybody else are launching all of these hyper powerful processing units that allow this stuff to then become edge technologies. It doesn't, so you can have an old person's home that can have a robot that is, and to the bit that we touched on earlier, not just an expert in social care, but it could also be your best friend. It can also maybe check you, rotate you in bed, can check you for your illness and ailment, and also do other things that one human being wouldn't do. And I think this is where you can consolidate and you can actually get real value at a time when, you know, the UK has an aging population, and whilst we can talk about how many people are in the country, we still don't have enough people to look after our old people, right? Let's be really honest about this stuff. So this is where I think the tech is, there's massive investment, and we're at that kind of epiphany point where people go, ta-da, I can trust this to do this. And actually this GP can now look after 50 people really effectively, but be in Bristol, but looking after people in Brighton, and vice versa. And adopting these tech kind of developments will really bring, and again, this feeds into that government opportunity piece. These are all opportunities to do more from less and actually give people a much better experience. And this is the positive side of all that tech stuff, like not having to wait to see a doctor, that you know that your grandparents are being, whilst in a home, are being looked after and not just left in bed because they're short-staffed. And I think there's a lot there where we can really go, we still want the human element, we still want people involved, but fundamentally there's not enough of us to do all of the wonderful things we want to do. So let's use this to augment our environment. And I think 2025 will be a time when we start seeing that more prevalent. And I think that's an exciting thing in many ways.
Well, you've actually gone from making me really pessimistic about the future with all the laws and compliance to actually being really excited.
You want to live in my head then?
I want to get old now. I am. What am I talking about? I want to get old. No, but I think it does loop back to that whole point around trust, right? And I think, you know, can you imagine, you know, right now, I mean, my mum's, you know, got a degenerative disease at the moment, and she's, you know, my dad's around and everything else, but at some point, you know, in the future, you know, she'll need more care, and it does make you think, like, you know, where does that stand? Like, how would I feel about having, you know, essentially a robot, right, doing the majority of that proactive? Because my mum's one of those people that will never say anything's wrong, right? So actually, you need the data. You need the data to go, no, hold on, you haven't slept for 4 nights, you haven't eaten, you know, your pulse is this, your blood pressure is this. You know, and it's still very much at the moment on, unless you've got, you know, a nurse that comes in every day and, you know, does those things. And I know people, I'm sure we all do, who have that. But to have something that's there all the time that lets you get on with your life, but actually is almost the truth pot, right, is a really interesting one to see the impact that's going to make to to care, you know, and I think that's a really great, I think that's a really interesting, we could have a whole session on this. I think it's a really interesting one. Darren.
Yeah, I was just coming in on Ken's robotic side. So again, I agree with Ken in that, you know, I think it's the intersection of lots of different things mean that robotics in 2025 could see a big jump forward. I think in much the same way, you know, the theories behind the sort of generative pre-trained transformers that powers the GPTs, that theory's been around for a long time, but it took the intersection of the processing capabilities to enable that to be done really fast and at scale, which has really led to the sort of, you know, the AI advances that we've seen over the last couple of years. And in a way, we're in a similar place, I think, with robotics. So if you think, you know, an analogy is that chatbots that we've had on our websites, you know, we've had them for a long time, but they was very, very manually intensive in terms of us working out the flow of questions and what the answers could be. And now applying GPTs has allowed us to really accelerate and provide a lot better product with less human intervention required. So with the training of robots, you know, again, robotics has been very manually intensive, people actually doing actions and the sort of, you know, the robots learning from how do you pick this up, how do you put that back down again, and that type of thing. Whereas now with more, again, GPT-based training algorithms, you still need to have a human element to refine some of those things, but you can train robots a lot faster now using technology and just do the 20% at the end to really finesse the actions. And I think that intersection of the technology and where we are now is actually what's going to enable us to make a big leap forward potentially this year on the robotics side.
I love that. Will we see driverless cars properly? What do you think of that?
Did you see CES? At CES, they had the flying car that was on the back of the 6x thing. I know, like, that's pretty cool. Still not going to get past any kind of compliance and any kind of governance and controls. But hey, let's all just dream, right?
Interesting. Go ahead.
I think, Rob, just on your self-driving cars, we might see them outside of San Fran. That's the question, right? Because they're already, they already have, was it Wemo or whatever it is?
Yeah, we've got them in, yeah.
So a friend of mine went in one of those and they said it's very strange, but also very comforting once it gets going. Yeah, perfectly okay. So, I was going to just change tactics a little bit, Rob, and I was going to say it was just off the back of what Ken was saying a little bit earlier around sensors on AI or that, and actually, we've already seen this, and one of the predictions, obviously, being, you know, heading up InfoSec, one of the things we're seeing is more and more covert data gathering. So what we've got is we're supercharging AI with sensors to tell us environment to make decisions, and we've got this really interesting. I would say this is a geographical challenge as well, which is we've got lots of companies from all over the world that are building these solutions that gather data that is being shipped to wherever it's being shipped to. So, you know, if you think of all the sensors that are mapping data across, you know, you look in environments, you've got robots at home with radar technology, you've got cars, we've got more and more cars coming over from, you know, let's be honest, China are pioneering the whole electric vehicle market, and they're undercutting the likes of Tesla and all of that because actually batteries been. So we've got this technology move. I guess this is kind of my InfoSec angle, along with the technology angle that I love anyway. And you've got this mass data gathering, and you've got a lot of free software that's also being made available. So, you know, Grammarly and all of these things, all of that's being supercharged because people don't like to pay. They've got used to not for stuff. And anything that we're not paying for, we're giving a load of data back to where we're getting it from. And we're seeing that more and more and more, and companies using tactics to drive people to a free version, because it's like, well, you know what, if we can do free, and actually you've got the free and also doing that. So Netflix have moved into a model where we're still going to adverts. You still have to pay us, but you pay a little bit less. So we've got this halfway house. So mass data gathering. We're going to see more and more data already. You've got AI that's working on that, and we're supercharging with sensors. So we're ending up in this place where we're sharing even more than we're probably comfortable with, which is a real interesting matter. And I don't think we're still not questioning enough if that data is being used correctly. So if you think of all the mapping that we're having at home, in our roads, then you got nation states that we mentioned a little bit earlier. All of a sudden, we've got this kind of interesting challenge. And then talking about robots that are AI, one of the things that, as we know, military always get the first iterations of tech, and one of those things is these kind of robot dog type things with weapons armed on the back of them, which can go and do stuff. So we've got this really interesting thing happening where, if we go down the kind of doom and gloom side of it, we've got this mass data gathering that's going to be misused potentially to do the wrong things. And it's almost that bringing into 2025 the awareness of, should we still be doing these things? Because do we really need it? Do we need that fridge that has got cameras every time someone opens the door, just because we want to know if we need to buy more eggs or whatever? Right? These are the types of questions, I think, and it ties into the whole CSR thing. We just need to be better at, as we go into 2025. We've got all of this great stuff, but do we actually need it? Do we need that really clever thing that does it? And I'm sure there will be some people like, absolutely, and that's absolutely fine, as long as we are.
Yeah, it goes back to your point, doesn't it? Just because you can, should you? And I think that's the question that often, and I think in the fleet of technology innovation, quite often the use case of technology as it ends up is not how it was discovered or how it was invented, because I think we're always looking for that. What else can I get stuff to do? You use that example of people using, trying to use, generative AI tools, and they don't even know how to do the basics on their job or their technology. And it's almost a bit of that kind of leapfrogging. I think there's definitely a bit of a, we live in very comforted lives, most of us, right? The fact that you could even contemplate buying a fridge that knows when you're out of milk. I mean, I look at that and go, how freaking lazy can you get, right? But you wind forward 5 or 6 years, this stuff will just be, like you say, this stuff will just be standard, right?
Yeah.
It'll just be standard. Like, my car's got obvious like lane departure warning things, and it's like, if you're looking where you're going, mate, you're not going to go over the. But it's
you
must really
have a printer at home, right? Like my printer, like, it just orders its ink when it needs ink.
Same. Yeah.
Right. It's like, how's that any different to milk? Right. Like,
yeah, it's true. And that is quite handy for me. I mean, I don't know, I'd be more grumpy if I didn't get my coffee, and I probably would if I couldn't print. But that's but saying that, I'm on a coffee subscription as well. So
it's the same principle. It actually is already, you're saying it's a bit odd with the fridge, but actually you're already accepting that. The number of things you get on subscription, like Amazon, I use Amazon food subscriptions. My food just turns up. Like we have changed culturally to this whole thing that we're actually quite prepared to trust these systems to do it. I never ever think of buying ink ever again. It's just one of those things. It just happens.
Just turns up. You don't even know you're low, do you? It just turns up. You don't even know you're low on ink. Yeah.
It very quickly becomes a standard way of.
I thought we'd end today because we're getting close to end time with something else that's been in the news quite a lot, and it's been a conversation we've had before, but return to work, right? So as people, and I hate that term, right, because that kind of implies that no one's worked for the last 4 years, but we've seen quite a lot again over the last few weeks of big companies, right? Again, I'm not going to name them all, we all know who they are, all demanding, right, that's it, come March, you're back in the office 5 days a week, this sloppy work culture is over. Well, I'm really keen, just across all of you, what's your current stance on hybrid working?
I mean, I'm happy to go first, and to be honest with you, it's no change from a work standpoint in terms of the way we've been operating. So we made the decision to change contracts shortly after we went into lockdown, because we were at risk of breaching everyone's contracts because they were asked to go into the office. So that adjustment was made. That was intentionally made, and I think the productivity and the way the business is performing has not shown any downgrade from what we were doing prior to, obviously with the exception of the challenges during lockdown.
Yeah, of course.
So I think for that reason, the business has made a strategic approach, which is we embrace that way of working. Having said that, having a conversation with, I think it was another CIO at an event, they were talking about the challenge for City of Westminster, where you've got lots of local businesses that are really struggling. And I think that's the big impact of the working abroad, which is the angle that we don't see when we're in our home.
Yeah,
that's right.
That it really does impact those local businesses because they rely on people going into the office, buy their lunches from them, or to do a bit of shopping when they're at work. And I think that's the balance. And I think it's striking the right balance between supporting those local companies versus getting people into the office. And I think that's
a shift though, isn't it? I mean, I've found our local high street, which was almost, a really dreary place to go, is actually really vibrant. We've had there's a lot more competition, there's a lot more. I think we've only got lockdown killed a few, but I think when we were kind of coming out of lockdown, there must have been 15 or so empty properties, or they were just turning into these kind of cheap stores that just sell anything that's made of plastic. But I think we've only got one now, and it's really it's all services. It's really services. There's not so much shops. We've got charity shops and coffee shops, but there's lots more. We've got care clinics. They've got drop-in centres for people. They've got it's not quite a learn direct, but a kind of a learn new skills place that's just open. Lots of different food chains. So actually, I think our local high street has really benefited from the fact that, on average, anyone that works in office is probably around 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And I've seen the complete opposite turnaround. But it's really interesting, isn't it, as to what's driving it? Is it that financial, you need to bring money into the city type thing, which I see a lot of in London. I mean, we still get days in London where, there's quite a lot that's closed down near our office, and we're Liverpool Street. Mantesh.
Yeah, no, I think it's that fine balance, isn't it, Rob? So from us, we're not changing our stance as it stands, working from home. We, at the beginning of the lockdown or mid-lockdown, we moved from like a 5-story building to just one floor space. And I think being a charity is one of the perks, and an advantage from an employer perspective, or definitely from a tech leader perspective. I've been able to employ now people out of Manchester, out of Newcastle. So the skill, you're just not limited to, you need to be office based or near office based. I'm having people working from Blackpool everywhere, and productivity nothing shown to say productivity has gone down. But the flip side is what you guys are mentioning is the impact on the smaller businesses, people who used to come around in a van to sell your coffee and sandwiches and stuff. Those estates are now pretty much closed or working very few days a week. So it's just that fine balance. But from an employer perspective, from a team perspective, it's working really well. Teams are enjoying, and the flexibility. Like when I worked in London, leaving 6 o'clock in the morning, not getting back till 8 o'clock sometimes, and now being able to finish. And when you finish, you're home, and being able to do stuff with the kids and take them to their different activities. It's a right balance between what suits you versus the small businesses who rely on us going into the offices.
Any impact on managing people?
It is challenging. I started my current role in the lockdown, so building those relationships you have to. And one of the things which comes quite often is when we are on team calls, which pretty much all of us are back to back
all the time.
When we start, it kind of, you miss the social interaction, because when you're on the team, it's very transactional, it's very work related, unless you have those one-to-ones with your direct reports, or you find time with the team to talk about how's the family or what you did over the weekend. Sometimes you're so busy, you kind of miss out on that personal side, if that's the right word to use here. And it's very transactional, work focused, and before you know, the week is ended and you haven't spoken to someone about how things were, or on the personal level. But now I think most of the time it's okay. People do get confined in what they're there to do and then stop working. Whereas in the office there was like, grab a cup of coffee, going out for lunch, that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. And that's the challenge I see.
No, thanks, man. It's good stuff. We'll be quick. Get the last two of you in. So Ken, go for it.
So I'm going to go completely off piece and go, macroeconomics are not here for us to sort out. That is the job of governments, etc.
Yeah.
So if the City of London has not got enough people in it to sustain the businesses, then the City of London needs to rezone what the City of London is. And quite candidly, if you do that quickly enough and you converted some of those, instead of approving another massive office block that nobody wants, and turn that into residential stuff and go, hell, we can have an extra 200,000 people living in the centre of London, those little businesses will do perfectly fine.
Yeah.
It is absolutely not my concern
I agree.
whether the noodle bar is getting enough people buying noodles. If the Westminster government or council want more people doing that, they have to change the demographics of the city. Fundamentals. I am actually a complete advocate for hybrid and home working. I think unless you need to physically be next to someone, and there are roles that require that, then do so. But as an organization, for us, we are a knowledge management professional services team. We have small groups that work really well together. It's very intimate. We're a small company, and yet 99% of us are at home. And yet we maintain that intimacy. We maintain that for our clients. Our clients aren't in the city. Like we've got an office like literally right next to Monument. So we're just down the road from Cisilion, and we don't go and see our clients. The clients want to make the call from home because it's efficient, it's quick. They can do it from wherever they are in Surrey or north of Scotland, wherever they are. And so fundamentally, we're adapting around our people. I'm not saying it's right for every organization. That is absolutely not, it should be mandated. But I do think that this is here to stay. And this idea that I've built a monument to me in the Canary Wharf, like the HSBC lot, then they're the ones that have got to deal with it, right? It's their problem. It's not actually, if other organizations can survive, I'm sure that they'll work it out. It's not like
shit
that.
Shit happens, right? Shit
Yeah.
happens. Yeah. I do think also maybe next time Ken for mayor, I think.
Yeah. Hey, I'd be tempted.
Darren, quickly, we've got a few minutes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously, the public sector perspective is, as a council, not all of our staff can work from home because, we're delivering services to residents within a local area. However, where we have been able to adopt hybrid working, it's been very successful. It's enabled us to attract and employ talent outside of our immediate area, and we benefit from that greater pool of people that we can attract. It also gives us the opportunity to look at our buildings as part of our public estate and really maximise the use of that by offering co-location to other public sector organisations, other areas of the private sector, which again helps with the distribution of properties and availability of residential versus business. So if we're assisting in introducing more housing into the area because we can accommodate sort of some office space which would have been somewhere else, then that's a benefit to the area as well. So totally agree with Ken with your sort of we're not here to sort out the macroeconomic situation, but we've got a role that we can help facilitate some of that, but it just takes a bit of imagination to actually see what the art of the possible is.
Brilliant. Listen, thank you all. We're out of time, but I really enjoyed that. We covered lots of topics today. So working from home is staying. So hybrid working is here to stay. AI is going to get bigger, scarier, faster. We're going to see it towards the edge. Year for quantum computing, I think we've all kind of shouted on. Driverless cars, maybe not. Robots in the home, certainly in hospitals, maybe this year. And security threats are going to get faster, bigger, more scary, and we're there to defend, right? I think that's the key bits we talked about. So fantastic set of conversations. As always, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for everyone listening live and on catch up, and we'll see you next month for the next show.
Thank you.
Cheers, bye.
Thanks all.